The Galactic Council was an ancient institution, the culmination of millennia of diplomacy and power, plays a body made up of hundreds of species from across the galaxy, all brought together in a fragile peace, held together by complex treaties and delicate negotiations. It was here aboard the massive flagship that the fate of countless star systems was decided, but to many of the species in attendance, the humans were a curiosity, at best a passing anomaly. At worst, Earth was a tiny blue speck in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, and the human race had only recently made the transition from primitive planetary dwellers to fledgling spacefaring species. The Council had laughed when humanity first sent its representatives to the grand meetings on their worn and outdated ships, with nothing but a handful of old military technologies to their name. The humans were a joke to the rest of the galactic elite, and their presence was largely ignored or ridiculed by the established powers. For the most part, the humans played along with their diplomatic charm. They smiled politely, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and mostly kept to themselves, while the other species bickered over trade routes, military control, and the future of the galaxy. They were expected to remain quiet and defer to the older species, but there were whispers in the halls of the Council of Humans, doing things in the shadows, things that unsettled the other species. There were rumors of strange technology found deep in the ruins of ancient worlds, once thought to be lost to time, rumors of a human adaptability that allowed them to thrive in the most hostile environments and grow beyond their means in ways the other species couldn't quite fathom. Still, these were only rumors, dismissed as unfounded or exaggerated by those in power, so it was with little fanfare that the humans arrived at the flagship for the Grand Summit, where the major powers would negotiate the terms of a new era of galactic peace and prosperity. The delegation was led by a single human pilot, Captain Aria Harris, who had been given the task of representing humanity's interests and presenting their proposal. The ship she commanded was nothing to marvel at. It was an old model, a relic of the past, a large and bulky vessel that looked nothing like the sleek and powerful starships of the Council members. It was a far cry from the sophisticated ships that glided effortlessly through the stars. The human ship looked like a piece of junk by comparison, its outer shell scarred and battered from years of use, its engines loud and inefficient, its sensors outdated and unrefined. But what it lacked in aesthetics it more than made up for in its sheer tenacity and adaptability. It was a testament to humanity's ingenuity and determination to survive in a universe that often seemed indifferent to their existence. And as Captain Harris and her crew prepared to dock aboard the flagship, the Council members sat in their grand chambers, unaware of what was about to unfold. They laughed at the primitive ship, dismissing it as a mere formality in the grand theater of galactic politics. Little did they know that their laughter would soon turn to fear as they came face to face with something they never expected, a force far more ancient than the Council itself, a force that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the moment to strike. The small human ship drifted closer to the galactic flagship, its unassuming silhouette dwarfed by the grandeur of the massive vessel it was about to dock with. The Council members, seated in their high-tech conference hall, glanced at the approaching ship with amusement, their collective gaze dismissing it as nothing more than a distraction. Many of them had seen such ships before. After all, the humans were an emerging species still clinging to their crude technologies. To the mighty Zinfar, the fleet masters of the Skavari Dominion, and the stoic Orolith from the Tenebrous Cluster, the ship seemed like an embarrassing relic from a forgotten age, a far cry from the sleek designs that graced the stars. "Is this really all they brought?" whispered a Razhof diplomat to his neighbor, his voice dripping with condescension. The small, insectoid creature snickered in response. They had all assumed that humanity, with its history of wars, was merely a step behind the galactic elite, forever outclassed. The ship's thrusters sputtered as it closed the distance, its slow and uncoordinated approach almost comical. It lacked any of the graceful maneuvers that the Council's ships executed with ease. The alien species in the chamber couldn't help but laugh amongst themselves, the sound filling the room with dismissive amusement. Even the most naive diplomat could see that humanity's entrance had all the subtlety of a rusted cog in a well-oiled machine. The delegation's official records were already uploaded, and the names of the human representatives were little more than footnotes. No one expected anything of substance, certainly not from an insignificant race whose greatest achievements seemed to consist of surviving wars and learning to put out fires. As the human ship closed in, a sudden burst of static hissed from the communication array, and the voice of Captain Aria Harris filled the chamber. The laughter faltered for a moment as they heard her speak. "Greetings, honored members of the Galactic Council. I am Captain Aria Harris of the United Earth Federation. We bring a proposal for consideration, and we seek your attention." The council chamber fell silent, a momentary shift in the atmosphere. This was no ordinary species with an ordinary representative. Though her words seemed calm, there was an edge to her voice that was unfamiliar to the alien dignitaries. It carried a hint of something they had not anticipated. Was this arrogance, confidence, or something else entirely? The ship docked with the flagship, groaning as the sound of its airlock sealed echoed through the large hall. The chamber doors hissed open, and Captain Harris stepped into the room, her presence alone causing a subtle but noticeable shift in the energy of the assembly. Unlike the grand, impressive uniforms worn by the council's members, her attire was modest. Basic flight gear, boots scuffed from travel, and a face that bore the kind of no-nonsense resolve that made the onlookers uneasy. She stood before them, unafraid, unbowed, a stark contrast to the flurry of diplomatic grandeur surrounding her. And then, without missing a beat, she spoke, her words cutting through the room like a blade. "We've been dismissed for long enough," she said, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of something deeper. "It's time to stop pretending humanity is a joke." The council members shifted uncomfortably. This human was not what they had expected, not in the slightest. The murmurs started again, but this time there was hesitation in the voices that had once mocked her. This wasn't just a trivial diplomat from a backwater planet. This was something else entirely. What exactly were the humans hiding? What had they brought to this summit? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut through. For a moment, every single council member sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on Captain Aria Harris, who stood unwavering at the center of the chamber. It was as though the very air around her had changed, charged with a subtle energy that none of them could quite explain, but all of them could feel. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the growing unease spreading through the room. For years, the Galactic Council had been an institution of power, a place where the strongest and most advanced species came together to maintain their dominance. Species like the Zinthar, whose empire spanned countless star systems, and the Orolith, with their vast knowledge of the universe's mysteries. They had all seen their share of lesser species, primitive worlds, backward cultures, and had dismissed them without a second thought. Yet here was humanity, a species they had dismissed as little more than a footnote in the galaxy's history, standing before them with a quiet confidence that began to erode their arrogance. "You claim to know something we don't," the Zinthar delegate, Zathis, said with a scoff, trying to recover from the discomfort that had started to seep into his voice. "And yet you bring nothing but this rusted ship. What could it possibly do? What could you possibly do?" But Aria only smiled, a smile that sent a shiver down the spines of those who saw it. There was something dangerous about it, something they couldn't place. It was a smile of someone who had seen something far beyond their comprehension and knew they were about to reveal it. Without a word, she turned slightly, raising her hand to the air. A low, humming sound began to emanate from the far side of the chamber, distant at first, but growing louder by the second. The lights overhead flickered briefly, as if they were unsure of their own stability. A ripple of confusion spread through the council members, but none of them dared to speak. What was happening? Then the hum intensified, and the sound of metal groaning echoed through the flagship. The Council's control systems, their very core infrastructure, began to malfunction. The massive holographic displays that projected star maps and data streams flickered erratically before shutting down completely. Systems that were supposed to be foolproof, advanced beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of, were suddenly unresponsive. Panic stirred in the ranks of the council members. but it was too late to act. A moment later, the air in the room seemed to distort. At first, it was a slight shimmer, barely noticeable, but it quickly intensified. The fabric of reality itself felt, stretched, as if something beyond the laws of physics was beginning to pull at the edges of the chamber. "What's happening?" Cephas demanded, his voice tinged with alarm. Aria didn't answer immediately. She simply stood still, her eyes focused on the growing chaos around her. A subtle flick of her fingers, and the hum grew louder still, vibrating through the very walls of the flagship. Then, with a calmness that was almost eerie, she spoke again. "You're all wondering how this is possible, why your advanced systems are failing. It's simple, really. Humanity has a gift, something that transcends what any of you can understand. It's not about technology or force. It's about adaptation. What you see around you is nothing more than a demonstration of our true power, the ability to adapt to, and ultimately control, whatever we choose." The Orolith leader, Eldrak, whose towering form had remained stoic until now, leaned forward, his voice tinged with skepticism. "You cannot possibly believe that your primitive technologies could have such an effect. This is madness." Aria's eyes met his, and for the first time, she allowed a deeper, more knowing smile to creep across her face. "You think we're primitive, but you've forgotten one thing. Humanity doesn't just adapt to technology. We adapt to chaos. We adapt to survival. And in the face of anything at all, we don't just survive. We conquer." And with that, a sharp crack of energy echoed through the chamber, followed by a violent jolt that sent a ripple through the flagship. The lights dimmed, and for a fleeting moment, everything in the room seemed to freeze. It was as if the very laws of time and space had bent to her will. The council members, stunned into silence, could only watch in disbelief. The human ship, that insignificant piece of debris they had once mocked, now seemed to hold an unimaginable power. The control systems of the entire flagship were in chaos, unable to function as intended. A single ship, humanity's ship, had completely outclassed everything the council had come to rely on. And Aria Harris, she hadn't even broken a sweat. The room was still. The delegates were no longer laughing. And for the first time in years, the Galactic Council was afraid. The chamber was eerily quiet now, the once bustling, vibrant hub of galactic diplomacy reduced to an oppressive stillness. The hum that had filled the air moments before was now a low, ominous vibration, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. The holographic displays, which had been the pride of the Galactic Council, were dark, completely offline. The flagship's systems, renowned for their sophistication and security, were crippled by an unseen force. Captain Aria Harris remained composed in the center of the room, her calm demeanor at odds with the chaos around her. The alien delegates, once so sure of their superiority, now looked like nervous children, their arrogance shattered. The Zinthar diplomat, Sathis, who had once sneered at humanity, was now gripping the armrests of his chair with white-knuckled intensity, his sharp reptilian eyes darting nervously around the room. His voice was barely audible as he spoke, his words tinged with fear. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, his usual bravado now a faint echo. This disruption won't go unnoticed. You've triggered something beyond your comprehension. The Council will retaliate." Aria's eyes narrowed, her gaze never leaving the trembling figure of the Zinthar. "Retaliate," she said, her voice low and smooth, but with an undeniable edge. "This is just a warning. You've underestimated humanity, and you will continue to do so if you remain in this deluded state of superiority." Another voice, the deep, rumbling growl of Eldrak, the Orolith representative, echoed from the back of the room. "This is impossible. The technology you're using, it doesn't exist. It's not even within the bounds of known science. You are not telling the truth." Aria's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no humor in it, only a sharpness that cut through the air like a blade. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice soft, but laden with meaning. The truth is that humanity has always known more than you think. We have been watching you. We've been studying your civilizations, your technologies, your strengths, and we've been learning how to survive without you even knowing it. The Orolith growled in frustration, his massive form shifting uneasily. This is madness. How could you have developed something like this without our knowledge? Without anyone noticing? If this is a bluff, it's a dangerous one. I'm not bluffing, Arya replied coolly. What you're seeing now is only a fraction of what humanity is capable of. Your ships, your systems, everything you rely on to feel secure. It's all vulnerable. We know how to break it down, and we know how to rebuild it. You've relied too heavily on your technology, on your ancient systems. What you've forgotten is that technology can fail, but humanity, we adapt. We always have. The tension in the room was suffocating. The council members, who had spent millennia building their empires, who had held the galaxy in their grasp, were now at the mercy of a single, seemingly insignificant species. And as Arya spoke, it became clear that the greatest strength of humanity wasn't in their weapons, their ships, or their technology. It was in their relentless drive to survive, to learn, to evolve. A soft chime rang through the room, signaling a new communication. The image of a nervous human technician appeared on a small monitor floating near Arya, their face a mix of disbelief and urgency. Captain Harris, the technician said, the fleet just got a report. It's not just the flagship. It's all of their systems. Everything in their sector is going dark. The central hub is, well, it's going offline. We've got full control over the Council's communications now. Arya's eyes glinted with something unreadable. Good. Now they'll know exactly what we're capable of. The technician's face blinked away, and for a brief moment, the chamber was silent again. The council leaders, still reeling from the realization of their vulnerability, shifted uncomfortably. Their confidence had been shattered, and now, with no power to challenge the human ship or its mysterious abilities, they were left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. We didn't come here to fight, Arya said, her voice quiet but filled with undeniable authority. We came here to open your eyes, to show you that humanity is no longer the small, insignificant species you thought we were. We don't need your approval or your alliances. We don't need your technology. We just need one thing. What is that? Zethus asked, his voice trembling. Arya stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the council members, each of them now visibly unsettled. Respect, she said simply. And when we're done here, you'll have no choice but to give it to us. And with that, the final thread of arrogance among the council members unraveled, leaving them face to face with the undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer a joke. We're a force to be reckoned with. As the Zilvesh fleet disintegrated, their commander's resolve began to crack. The relentless barrage of railgun fire from Earth had shattered their forces beyond recognition, and there were no reinforcements to come. The once mighty fleet that had descended upon Earth with the intent of annihilation was now a broken, scattering collection of damaged vessels, each struggling to escape the human onslaught. The Zilvash had always prided themselves on their ability to adapt, but humanity's innovation had outpaced them at every turn, and now they were retreating in a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their invasion. But humanity wasn't done. Earth's military leadership knew the Zilvash would try to regroup. They had seen it before with other alien forces. The invaders might retreat, but they would always come back. It was an inevitability. So, humanity's forces pushed forward, determined to ensure that the Zilvash would never be able to regroup. The railguns fired with relentless precision, taking out ship after ship, and Earth's ground forces began targeting known Zilvesh strongholds on their moons and colonies. The Zilvesh had relied on the idea that their superior technology would always prevail, but their overconfidence had blinded them to humanity's ingenuity. The more they tried to adapt, the more they found themselves outmatched. Every Zilvish retreat was met with an unexpected human counterattack. Every defensive measure they tried to deploy was undone before they could even activate it. Even their most advanced shielding technology, once thought impervious to attack, was being overwhelmed by the adaptability of Earth's railgun technology. The turning point came when humanity's military unveiled its greatest innovation yet, railguns capable of striking with such force and velocity that they could disable entire fleets before the enemy had a chance to react. The Zilvash had underestimated the humans' ability to think beyond the immediate battlefield, and now they were paying the price. Humanity had developed a new kind of strike. Railguns that fired not just with force, but with perfect timing, able to anticipate Zilvish maneuvers before they even made them. As Zilvish ships tried to regroup and prepare for a final stand, Earth's military launched a new phase of the assault, utilizing orbital railguns that fired in tandem with the planetary-based systems. They created a storm of electromagnetic fire, a barrage that enveloped the retreating fleet. It was a spectacle of destruction. One Zilvish ship after another was torn apart, its hulls punctured by the concentrated force of humanity's railgun projectiles. For the Zilvash, the realization came too late. They had underestimated humanity's ability to think, to adapt, to evolve. The Zilvish tried to retaliate by launching a final wave of their most advanced weapons, hoping that they could land a devastating blow to Earth's defenses. Their most formidable warships, powered by ancient alien technology, surged forward in a coordinated assault. But this time, humanity was ready. The railguns had evolved again, now equipped with energy-draining capabilities that disabled the Zilvash's shields before their ships even had a chance to fire. Within moments, the Zilvash flagship, the last of their hope, was struck by a catastrophic volley of energy. Its central reactor exploded, taking the entire command vessel with it, and the remnants of the fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. The Zilvash had never known fear like this. They had faced enemies before, yes, but never a species so relentless, so adaptable, and so determined. Humanity was not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to define the future of the galaxy. As Earth's forces secured victory after victory, the Zilvash realized that their chances of winning had vanished. The very weapons they had feared were now a symbol of their defeat, a testament to humanity's ability to rise against impossible odds. The Zilvash leaders convened in a last-ditch effort to salvage their honor, but the reality was clear. Earth had become a force they could no longer reckon with. The war that they had hoped would be swift and decisive had turned into their greatest failure. In desperation, the Zilvash offered peace talks. They had no other option. The war was over. The tension in the room was palpable. The council members, once assured of their supremacy, now stood at the mercy of a species they had long considered beneath them. The holographic displays that had once shown the might of their fleets were still dark, the communication systems still locked down. The flagship, which had been a symbol of their power and unity, was now little more than a helpless shell, crippled by an unseen hand. Zethus, the Zinthar diplomat, was the first to break the silence. His voice, usually dripping with condescension, now quivered with an unsettling mix of disbelief and fear. This cannot be happening. You've thrown us into chaos. But we're the Council. We have allies, power, influence. We control this galaxy. Aria's gaze never wavered. She stood in front of them, a calm, unwavering figure, her expression as cold as the vacuum of space itself. The Council no longer controls this galaxy. Say this. You never did. You thought you could manipulate it, control it through your networks, your fleets, your endless treaties. But all of that is meaningless when you've forgotten one simple truth. You don't control everything. The Zinthar diplomat clenched his fists, his scales rippling with the anger he could no longer contain. You think you can just walk in here, cripple our infrastructure, and demand respect. You're nothing more than a barbaric species with a broken ship and outdated technology. Aria's lips twitched upward in a knowing smile. You still don't understand, do you? It's not about the ship. It's not about your technology. It's about something you fail to account for. The one thing that you will never replicate, no matter how advanced your species become. And what is that? Eldrak, the Orolith leader, asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. Humanity's drive to survive, Arya said simply. Our ability to adapt in the face of the unimaginable, to build when there's nothing left to build with, to fight when there's nothing left to fight for. You underestimate us because you can't comprehend how far we've come, how much we've had to fight for every scrap of knowledge, every inch of territory, every breath of air. A murmur rippled through the room. The Orolith, usually so stoic and composed, exchanged uneasy glances. The Zinthor diplomat bristled but said nothing. They were beginning to realize that this human, this representative of a species they had deemed insignificant, was right. Humanity had been surviving against the odds for centuries, against starvation, against their own kind, against entire planetary systems that sought to wipe them out. And now, they were facing something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. An enemy that was not content to simply survive, but one that was willing to fight to reshape the galaxy in its own image. Zethus's gaze shifted toward the flickering emergency monitors, and his voice trembled slightly as he spoke again. We've heard rumors about humanity's survivalist technologies, about your ability to thrive in hostile environments. But this, he gestured weakly toward the disintegrating systems around them. This is something else entirely. What is this? How did you do this? Arya took a slow step forward, her expression unreadable. You've been watching the wrong humans. You've been watching the ones who built starships and laser weapons, thinking that was all there was to us. But you missed the ones who built something else, the ones who learned to survive in the harshest environments, to live when all the odds were stacked against them. You underestimated us because you thought we were just like you. The council members, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves questioning everything. The human species, whose technology was once considered obsolete, was suddenly showing them something they hadn't even considered. It wasn't about the power of their ships or the strength of their weapons. It was about the resilience of the species itself. We've been hiding in plain sight, learning from you all, building our own systems, adapting your own technologies, and discovering things you never even knew existed, Arya continued. We've been waiting for the right moment, and that moment is now. The lights flickered once more, and this time, the hum that filled the room was more intense, almost electrifying. The energy in the air was palpable, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone present. Arya paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room before speaking again. I told you we weren't here to fight, but you're not going to walk away from this unscathed. Not anymore. If you want to continue pretending that you're in control of this galaxy, you're going to have to deal with us. All of us. And I promise you this, humanity doesn't lose. The Orolith leader, usually so composed, looked uncertain for the first time. He glanced toward the others, his large, dark eyes filled with something they had never shown before. Fear. They had been powerful, once. But now, facing the sheer force of will that humanity had demonstrated, they were left with no more illusions. The power had shifted, and there was no going back. The finality of Arya's words hung in the air like a thunderclap, deafening in its implication. The council members, who had ruled the galaxy for eons, now sat stunned, immobilized by the sheer presence of a human who had not only shattered their illusions, but made it clear that their future would no longer be dictated by their own hands. The room felt colder, darker, as though the very fabric of their supremacy was unraveling before their eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Zethus, the Zinthor diplomat, who had once been quick to mock, remained silent, his reptilian eyes flicking back and forth between the glowing emergency monitors and Arya's unyielding figure. He opened his mouth once or twice as if to say something, but the words never came. It was Eldrak, the Orolith leader, who finally broke the silence. His voice was low, careful, yet underlaid with a new respect, or perhaps fear, that had not been there before. "You are not the species we believed you to be," he said, his tone a mix of awe and hesitation. "How long have you been preparing for this? How long have you known the true extent of your power?" Aria's gaze softened, just slightly, as she turned to face him. "Long enough," she said simply, the words almost carrying an echo of something ancient, something far older than the Council could possibly understand. "Long enough to realize that we don't need to be like you to survive, and long enough to know that we don't need your permission to thrive." There was a long pause as the weight of those words sank in. The Orolith leader shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward the others, seeking some form of validation. But there was none. The Zinthar looked shaken, his usual smugness replaced by the look of someone who had just witnessed a fundamental shift in the universe. The Razhoth, who had been quiet until now, folded his arms, his antennae twitching nervously. Finally, Zethus spoke, his voice low and strained. "You've humiliated us. What do you expect from us now? You've made it clear that humanity is a force to be reckoned with, but if you think we will simply bow to you, you are mistaken." Aria's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "No, I don't expect you to bow to us. But I do expect you to respect us, and I expect you to understand that humanity will no longer be silenced, no longer be overlooked. You've ruled this galaxy as if your empires were unshakable. But now you'll have to reckon with the truth. Humanity is no longer the underdog. We're not a footnote in your history. We're here to stay." There was a long silence, and for the first time since the beginning of the summit, the Council members, once so sure of their dominance, found themselves without an answer. The ship they had mocked, the systems they had belittled, and the species they had underestimated had all proven their point. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were evolving into something far more dangerous, far more capable than the galaxy's elites had ever anticipated. The room grew colder still, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. And then, finally, it was Scathus who spoke again, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. "What now?" Aria didn't hesitate. "Now," she said, her voice carrying the weight of destiny itself, "we move forward. We make sure that humanity's place in this galaxy is no longer in question. We forge alliances when necessary. We stand our ground when we must. And we ensure that no one, no species, ever forgets who we are again." There was no anger in her words, no need for it. It was the calm certainty of someone who had already won. The Council had no choice now but to face the new reality. They could resist, they could try to hold on to the old ways. But the truth was undeniable. The galaxy was no longer theirs to command. And as Aria turned to leave the room, her final words echoed in the minds of every Council member, a haunting reminder of what had just transpired. This galaxy has a new ruler now, and it's not you, it's humanity. The door to the chamber slid shut behind her with a finality that left the Council to wrestle with their defeat. The hum of the flagship's systems, still flickering and unreliable, was the only sound that followed her exit. The galaxy had changed. And no one, least of all the Council, knew what the future would hold now that humanity was no longer a species to be laughed at. The era of the old powers was over, and the dawn of a new age had begun.